In today's business world, being an average CEO is no longer an option. That's why we're committed to equipping you with the resources and the tactics necessary to not just survive, but to thrive. You're listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline podcast, where we are more than just a voice in the crowd.
Thank you so much for being here for another episode of Not Your Average CEO Lifeline. Today we have with us Marc Cayle, who is here to talk to us all about a beginner's guide to franchising and investing in a franchise. And he has a ton of information for us. So we're really excited to have him here with us. Marc, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'd love to start out if you can just tell our audience a little bit about you and your background and how you got into the franchise space.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I started in franchising about 30 years ago, and I was working with a founder actually on another project. And he said, I'm looking to franchise this business. Would you like to help? And I really didn't know anything about franchising at that point. I was sort of right out of school and doing other things, but it was always intriguing to me. And fortunately, he was not only a Harvard MBA, but he was very frugal. And he refused to bring in a lot of professionals that would have been expensive. So it really made us School of Hard Knocks MBA for me, learning the ropes of what a franchise was by actually writing the original, what was then called the Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, that is now called the Franchise Disclosure Document. But we wrote it together instead of hiring an attorney to do it, which, looking back, it was great, but always using a professional.
Yeah, the benefit of hindsight, right?
So it all, we started there, and I did everything in franchising you needed to do. I helped sell the franchises. Actually, I was in charge of selling the franchises. And then once they came on board, I was in charge of the initial training, the site selection, layout and design, everything you can do, training them to open the stores. I helped run the corporate stores. So there was not one thing that I didn't really cut my teeth on franchising. And one thing led to another, and we grew relatively quickly. And the founder said, let's put the brakes on and support the people we have in place, which is responsible franchising, which is today the buzzword in franchising. If you are selling hundreds of locations and you don't get them open, that doesn't do anyone any good. So responsible franchising is staying on top of the ones you sold and helping them get up and running and profitable. So 30 years ago, we were already thinking that through, which was way ahead of our time at that point. Then I branched off and helped Franchoice, which is the basically the parent company that I'm an independent consultant for, launch. So I was the second consultant to join Franchoice 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to help more people figure out what was a good fit for them, because people would come in the door and look at the concept that I was working with, but they might have not been a good fit. So I saw them leave and I was like, oh, they could be a great franchisee, but just not for what we were doing. And so the consulting side of it allowed me to have a larger inventory of franchises that I could help choose from for my candidates. And really, there was something for just about everybody. So it helped me help a lot more people get into franchising. So that's sort of how I did it. And then along the way, became a multi-unit franchisee in the in-home care space and grew that for 10 years, and then had a wonderful exit in 2014, and now back at Franchoice full-time since then. I did a couple of other things since then, but now I'm focused back on Franchoice full-time. And that business that my wife and I both actually have is called Fran Destiny, and that's how we LLC for what we're doing.
I love the name. So it sounds like you've had quite a career in franchising, encompassing every different facet of it, really. So for someone who is just starting out and considering investing in a franchise, what advice would you give them on where to start, what they should look for, what they should be considering?
Well, with over 4,000 franchise concepts out there, it's really important to use a professional. to really dig through what makes the most sense. So
That's
that's the
interesting.
first thing.
4,000. I did not know that. That is overwhelming.
Is very
Yeah.
overwhelming. And so when people go to the web and they're like, oh, well, I think I like to golf, I should open a golf store. That is not how you should go about this. We need to help you find a franchise that allows you the time and resources to go golfing when you want,
Yeah.
not take a hobby and make it your business. Now, you should still have a passion for what you're doing, but ultimately, what really makes the most sense is to match the business attributes of a concept, no matter what that concept is, to what makes sense for you. What kind of employees do you want, if any? Do we want a brick and mortar site? Or do we want a service like people in a truck kind of thing? Do we want long sales cycle, short sales cycle, all these different attributes of a business, right? So the most important thing is to match those, and then the franchise basically becomes a widget. It doesn't matter what the widget is as long as the franchise attributes match. And so that's sort of where we get started. So when someone is first starting to figure this out, it's like when you are looking to buy a home, right? You're driving around and you're looking at all these open houses and things like that, but you could walk into an open house and your budget's $500,000 and the open house is 2.6 million. And you're like, oh, well, that looks great, but there's no way that I could ever do that, right? So that's why you use a broker or someone, a sales representative that knows what the market is and what makes sense for you, so that if you're looking for a 4-bed 3-bath house on half an acre, that's what they're going to show you. And so it's a very similar situation with what we're doing at Friend Destiny.
So when you talk about, I think that is a perfect first step, looking for a professional's help. What type of professional would someone be looking for? Are they looking for a broker? Is it called an advisor? How does that work in terms of the terminology?
So it's interesting. I just literally did a LinkedIn post about this, a broker versus a consultant, right? So there are many, many, many people in this industry that say that they can help you find a perfect match. Well, there's what we call flybys, where it's a person that spends 15 minutes with somebody, figures out that they can send them to 30 or so businesses or franchises and see what sticks. That is not how this is supposed to work. A consultant, which is what I am, would take the time to learn about what you are looking for. I spend hours with my candidates before even sending them to concepts. So there's a big, big difference between a quote unquote broker and a consultant. So the consultant would absolutely find out exactly what the goals and envision what you're looking for, have a complete understanding of what your budget is, what location you're in, and all the other attributes that we discussed before proposing concepts that they think make sense for you. And so then the idea is that they're going to give you a very, very strategic way to go through that due diligence. They're going to give you the questions to ask the franchisors, the questions to ask the franchisees, because you will be discussing your needs and wants and hopes and desires with the franchisees that are already doing it, right?
Mhm.
So that you're validating what everyone is saying. So there's a very, very structured process if you work with the correct kind of person. So that's really what my advice would be, is find someone not only that believes in what they're doing and is really, really trying to do the right thing for you, but also has experience. Like, for instance, I mean, listen, I've been a franchisor, a multi-unit franchisee with a great exit, and a franchise consultant over the last 30 years. I live, breathe, and eat franchising. It's all we do. And my wife does it full time too. So you can imagine the conversations in my house. There's nothing, pretty much no sentence that doesn't start with some sort of franchising. So that's sort of where we're at with it.
Yeah, and I think you made a really great point when you're talking about, um, working with a consultant is going to help you understand that just because you like golfing doesn't mean that you should invest in a golf franchise or I like pets. It doesn't necessarily mean I shouldn't invest in a pet franchise. So you're saying that as a consultant, you really dive in, ask those questions about, lifestyle, budget, sites, etc., and really find out what the right franchise is for someone rather than just following something that they think they're interested in or is a hobby or something that they heard of someone else enjoying, something like that.
Exactly. And everyone's different. Listen, we work with everyone from, we just helped place a 25-year-old, one of my daughter's very good friends, all the way up to someone I'm working with that's in their 70s right now.
Oh, I
And
love
each of
that.
these, yeah, I mean, each of these people have different outlooks on where they're at in their lifespan and lifestyles and everything that they want to do. And for someone a little bit older, they might be interested in leaving a legacy for their children or grandchildren. For someone younger, they're looking to dig in and make it happen. And so there's everyone is so different. This is not a one fits all thing at all. And so
Yeah, and
it's
that's a really
important.
good point that the franchises really can be for anyone, any age, any stage in their life or their career. I think what I'm understanding is that a franchise consultant can then work with that person and find what the right fit is. I'm assuming that, what you might recommend for someone that is 25 versus 75, different stages of their career, different locations. That's all going to be varied. And so it's really important to work with a professional that can drill all that down for you.
Exactly. And each franchisor has very specific wants and needs from what they look for in a franchisee, right? So we're looking at it from both sides. We know
Okay.
these franchisors, like I know founders and their families and their kids, like we've been working with these people for 20 something years, some of them,
Yeah.
and we know exactly what they're looking for. If you are an introvert, we're not going to show you something that requires a lot of sales, right? It might be a concept that has a built-in call center that takes in all the inbound leads that are generated through the the marketing that the franchisor helps you do. And so there's a lot of there's some of that actually book appointments and all you need to do is make sure your people show up when they need to show up. And so there's a lot of different models that franchisors have, and they look for specific types of franchisees that they would award a franchise to. Again, I use that word specifically. They award the franchise. They don't sell franchises. Well, some do, but we don't work with those.
Like
We
that
work with
distinction. Yeah.
yeah, there's a big distinction. And, so it's very important to have a complete understanding of both what the franchise prospective franchisee is looking for as well as what the franchisor is looking for. So we're making that right match.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about it from that perspective either, that it has to be a fit for the franchisor as well.
Yes, for
Yeah, that
sure.
makes a lot of sense. So since you've been doing this for so long and you've seen it from sort of all angles, all positions, what kind of advice can you give our audience on the pitfalls to avoid? What should they steer clear of if they're exploring franchises?
So just based on what we just talked about, right? And if you feel like you're getting sold and there's pressure there, there's something to look out for, right? I mean, these franchisors, some of them just want to churn deals and they want to get as many franchises sold as possible. Maybe they were just bought by a PE firm and they need to churn out some deals. And that is something that PE firms are circling a lot of these companies right now, which is not a bad thing. I mean, it's great to have the great new capital injected into the business to help both the franchisors and the franchisees. But when you have a PE firm that is only looking to flip the deal after a couple of years, that's something to look out for sure. And so certainly there are so many potential challenges that come up on the financing side. Can you get this funded properly? And that is the biggest challenge for most people is to actually understand, especially if they're coming from corporate America. And that's a whole nother conversation that we could talk about for hours. The all of a sudden you're 55 years old and you can get replaced by two 25-year-olds for half the money.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. But the understanding that you need the proper amount of capital to support yourself for 12 to 18 months while you ramp up this business so that you're not bleeding the business to death, right? During the startup. That is the biggest reason for failure in any business is lack of capital. And so what we tell people is we have funding sources, and we have a gentleman that we use to build pro formas for people, and he's basically an outsourced CFO. We send all of our people to professionals so that they can help them navigate that part of this process. The funding is huge, and if you're not properly capitalized, that's going to be a really big red flag. First of all, for the franchisor, they won't approve you. But you need to understand that you're going to get into this, and you need to build in some working capital, either from whether it's a home equity line of credit or a 401k rollover or an SBA loan that actually has enough to support you if you don't have the money to support yourself in the beginning stages.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that I like how you gave the distinction of the 12 to 18 months. I think that gives someone a concrete number to look at for sure.
Some franchises, they break even in cash flow way quicker than that.
Sure.
Let's plan on being pleasantly surprised when
Yes.
that happens instead of not ready for it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So with all of the changes that, happen, just in the economy, post-pandemic, where do you see the franchise industry as a whole going in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years?
So it's interesting. Years ago, I used to have questions revolved around recession resistance, right? Now we talk about recession resistance, pandemic resistance, and Amazon resistance, right?
Amazon resistance. Okay, yes.
So, I mean, these are all things that people are thinking about, that franchisors are thinking about, and you really need to understand that, listen, essential businesses are always safer. And also businesses that have a lower overhead. So, I mean, anything in brick and mortar that has a product can be duplicated online, period. But the franchisors now understand this, and there are several franchisors that actually do have websites for the general public to go in and buy their goods. But the franchisees, if they're in their zip code, get part of that revenue for doing nothing. So that's an interesting way that some franchisors are looking at this, is like, listen, it's going to happen, but we might as well take advantage of it and give the franchisees a piece of the action if they're in their market.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting to see like how that is shifting and making it sort of Amazon proof and pandemic proof as well. I think that's something that we're all keenly aware of now. So as our last question, we ask this of all of our guests. As you know, the title of our podcast is Not Your Average CEO. So we'd love to hear, what that means to you. We obviously invited you on the podcast because we feel that you're not average. And so we'd love to just hear it in your words, what that means to you.
I appreciate that. So when I ran my franchise, I had 285 employees that I was basically in charge of, not only them, but when I looked at it, I was in charge of their families. I was in charge of their kids. I was in charge of all these things. A CEO is much more than someone who tells someone what to do. And my view on it is a good CEO will delegate, they will empower, they will nurture, they will want to help people succeed and advance in their company, and not just be looking out for themselves. I mean, I have a couple of great examples of that. One of my schedulers, it was an in-home care agency. Again, I had 250 caregivers running around going into people's homes every day. So it was a relatively large organization, and schedulers are very, very important in that realm. And one of my schedulers was a chain smoker, and we had an upstairs office. So every time she had to smoke, she had to go downstairs, go up the street because we didn't allow smoking right in front of the building. And it was like a 15-minute ordeal every time she had to have a cigarette. And she then once asked me for an advance on her paycheck, which to me was the straw that broke my back, right? I was saying, listen, you're missing hours of work each day to go smoke, and then you ask me for an advance. So there must be something more going on. So I called her into my office. I said, listen, let's calculate how much you're spending on cigarettes each month. And we did. And it was probably, I don't remember back then, it was a couple $100, whatever it was. Because cigarettes weren't, I don't even know how much they are now, but they're a lot, right? So
Yeah.
they were less back then. And I said to her, if you quit smoking, I will bonus you, call it that $200 a month, starting the day you do it. The next day, she quit smoking.
Wow.
And so not only did she have better health, she had better cash flow personally, I also got the advantage of more of her time actually
Sure, you got
doing her
hours
job.
back.
So it worked out for both of us. But those are the kind of things where many people just wouldn't have taken the time to deal with that at all. They might have just fired her, but she was
Sure.
fantastic. And so those are the kind of things, like a concrete example of what could and should be done, as far as I'm concerned, to help employees succeed. And I think all CEOs should be doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, sort of thinking of those creative solutions. I think,
Right.
like you said, someone that is sort of your average everyday CEO might have just said, well, that's it, the hell with it. Then,
Right.
we're just going to term you. But you really looked for a creative solution and it worked out well for both of you.
It did. I hope
Really.
she's still not smoking.
Yes. Yes. I hope she hears this podcast and
Right.
thinks to have that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Linda, if you're out there. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again, Marc. It was so nice to have you on. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to share all these insights about franchises with our audience. And can you tell our audience a little bit about where to find you, where they can connect with you, learn more if they're looking for a franchise consultant?
Sure. We have a landing page just for this podcast, actually. It is Fran Destiny, so FRANDESTINY.com/NYA. And so if you go there, you will be able to look around and see what's going on. There's a couple of really interesting additional bits of information there that you can use for your research, and I would be happy to help any way possible.
Wonderful. And we'll include that all in the show notes as well.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you again so much. And it was great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, thank you.
You've been listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline with your hosts Danielle Cuomo, CEO, and Nicole Glitchio Els, COO. This podcast has been sponsored by Virtual Assist USA. If you'd like to know more about the hosts or exploring virtual assistant services, visit virtualassistusa.com for more information.